Truth is, I am Iron Man.
What a fantastic beginning!
It's time to talk about the biggest franchise of all time, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And of course, we're doing it with a poll. The MCU, for the people living under a rock, is an over-decade-long franchise all stemming from Marvel Comics. There's 23 films, with more to come, 14 TV shows with more to come. It inspired other studios to try to make their own cinematic universe. It has grossed $22,587,903,034, making it the highest-grossing film franchise of all time. It had one of their films be the highest-grossing superhero movie of the year until 2020, where Sonic the Hedgehog took it. And 3 of the films made it into 1001 movies you must see before you die. Because the MCU appeals to almost everyone, I sent this poll to 4 different subreddits. These subreddits were r/Marvel, r/Mauler, r/CinemaSins, and r/Weekly Planet Podcast. This resulted in 97 responses. It's time to catalog all of them. Though before we begin, I need to make some clarifications. 1. There will be spoilers for almost everything, so you have been warned. 2. This poll was sent before WandaVision and before The Falcon and Winter Soldier. And while I'm pretty sure that didn't change anything, just keep that in mind. 3. I will not state any of my takes on the MCU films as a whole. This isn't about me, it's about the responses. 4. I will briefly try to explain why whatever movie has how many votes, but it won't be a review or analysis. And 5, I had to count some of these myself, so I might have miscalculated, but even if I did, it's probably not off by that much. Alright, we got the rules out of the way, let's begin! In first place for both the entire MCU and the Avengers films is Avengers Infinity War, with 23 people saying it's their favorite, which is 24% of the voters. This is one of the 3 movies in the MCU to make it into the 1001 movies you must see before you die. This film was basically the Empire Strikes Back of the MCU, but unlike Empire, it was the culmination of 10 years worth of films. The main praise I see for this film a lot is Thanos. In second place for the MCU, and first place for the Captain America films, is Captain America: The Winter Soldier, with 18.7% of the voters saying it's their favorite, which is 18 people. Winter Soldier is praised for the darker story. The darker story being Captain America having to face his best friend and potentially kill him. I remember at the time people saying specifically that they were surprised a Captain America film was good. Though I have a feeling that the tables are gonna turn on this one. In third place for the MCU, and first place for the Guardians films, is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, with 9 people saying it's their favorite, which is 9.4% of the voters. This movie, like the first Guardians film, is praised for the drama, the comedy, the visuals, and the music. But unlike the first film, it's also praised for the villain. So far, I haven't found any major videos arguing that it's bad, though I will say this film started the common complaint of the MCU, where tension is broken by jokes.
Mantis! Look out!
You know, you're probably wondering why you're looking at what seems to be one of those fan-made recreations. Funny story, because of the strike I got from the Spiral reaction, I decided to be less risky on this. My way of doing that was to play footage from homemade movies. They recreated the trailers for multiple Marvel films. Prepare to see a lot of that. Avengers Endgame is in second place for the Avengers films and fourth place for the entire MCU, with 8 people saying it's their favorite, which is 8.3% of the voters. This film was a large event, even more so than Infinity War. Everyone was talking about it, websites crashed. Yours truly reminded the classroom how many days were left until it came out, every single day. Teachers wrote stuff like this on whiteboards, and it beat Avatar at the box office for a little over a year. I remember people applauding when Captain America lifted Mjolnir. Nowadays I see more and more people not looking at this film in a positive light. Guardians of the Galaxy is in 5th place in the MCU and 2nd place for the Guardians films, with 6 people saying it's their favorite, which is 6.3% of the voters. While technically not the first MCU film to be set in space, it was the first to take full advantage. Similar to Guardians 2, this film is praised for characters, drama, comedy, and visuals. However, the villain in this film, Ronan the Accuser, isn't praised for anything. Despite this, he reappeared in Captain Marvel almost 5 years later. He wasn't there for that long. I had rewatched the movie and count how long he's on screen for, but do I look like the type of person who would rewatch Captain Marvel? Also, this film has quite a few cameos. Tied with Guardians 1 and 2nd place in the Captain America trilogy is Captain America Civil War, with 6 people saying it's their favorite, which is 6.3% of the voters. This film raised the stakes as well as introduced new characters. The big character this film introduced was Tom Holland's Spider-Man. This was huge at the time. The closest we got to Spider-Man appearing in the MCU at the time was this fake post-credit scene for Avengers Age of Ultron. The main unique thing about this film is the consequences. A reoccurring criticism with the MCU is that it tends to undo consequences. However, this film, the consequences were not undone. Sort of. The heroes were still punished for their actions. The reason this film might be this low might be for one common criticism: Zemo's plan. Also, some think that BVS is better than Civil War. In 6th place is the film that began it all, Iron Man, with 5 people saying it's their favorite, which is 5.2% of the voters. Iron Man is also in 1st place for all of the Iron Man films. This film is one of the few MCU films that even the harshest of critics love, except the 3rd act. The Avengers is tied with Iron Man, with 5 people saying it's their favorite, which is 5.2% of the voters. In terms of the 4 Avengers films, it's in 3rd place. This was actually the first MCU film I ever saw. I saw it when it first came out. My sister and her friend weren't engaged. They were so bored that they came up with nicknames for each Avenger. Black Widow was Katniss, Hulk was Oscar the Grouch, Captain America and Iron Man were Pope, and I don't remember the others. This is the film that really motivated other studios to make their own crossovers. There were other crossovers in the past, but not quite as big as this. Tied with Iron Man and the Avengers is Thor Ragnarok, with 5 people saying it's their favorite, which is 5.2% of the voters. Thor Ragnarok is heavily criticized for being overly jokey. Other people didn't mind this because they found the other 2 Thor films too boring, or because they found it too funny to care. On the topic of Ragnarok, remember when James Corden pulled a prank on an entire audience by having the actors from Thor Ragnarok act out Thor Ragnarok instead of showing them the movie? In 1st place for the Spider-Man films and 7th place for the MCU is Spider-Man Homecoming, with 2 people saying it's their favorite, which is 2.1% of the voters. This film was the first MCU Spider-Man film ever. He first appeared in Civil War, but this was his first solo film. I specifically remember watching The Avengers and questioning where Spider-Man is. And here we are now. This film gets praised for its humor, Tom Holland, the villain, and Ned. Tied with Homecoming is Black Panther, with 2 people saying it's their favorite, which is 2.1% of the voters. Black Panther was way larger than expected. It was nominated for Best Picture, it got the Oscars to make a new category, it made it into 1001 movies you must see before you die, and I was once sent this text. For last place, I'm skipping Thor the Dark World, Iron Man 3, mainly because it's more interesting to talk about why people hate them. In 8th place, which is also last place, is Thor, the first one, with 1 person saying it's their favorite, which is 1% of the voters. Thor is an MCU film I don't often hear a lot of people talk about. The main thing I hear is that people don't like Kat Dennings, and they liked Loki. Considering I can't think of anything in particular about it other than people saying it's okay, I'll mention the fact that it was in 3D. Remember when everything tried to be in 3D? That was a weird era. Ant-Man. It has 1 person saying it's their favorite, which is 1% of the voters. This movie gets praise for being funny, but also gets criticism for the Pym particles not making sense. Another big criticism of this film is that Edgar Wright was fired and half the film was made by an uncredited worker of Back to the Future: The Ride instead. The 3 people who selected other said, "They're all terrible, can spiders tell the future?" And Luis recaps the MCU for 3,000 minutes. In first place is Thor the Dark World, with 25 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 26% of the voters. This film is criticized for being boring, having Kat Dennings, having Malekith, and this scene. The movie can still be pretty funny.
I've got this completely under control.
Is that why everything's on fire?
Also, Loki is great. Captain Marvel is in second place, with 22 people saying it's their favorite, which is 22.9% of the voters. Captain Marvel is criticized for having a boring and unlikable main character, Brie Larson's acting, and massive continuity errors. I actually can't think of any major praises I've heard for this film. Samuel L. Jackson's pretty good. And The Dawn.
The Dawn is one of the most wholesome characters in EFAP lore. A hero who fights against his arch-nemesis Captain Marvel for the orphans and Becky.
In third place is The Incredible Hulk, with 15 people saying it's their favorite, which is 15.6% of the voters. Similar to Thor, I don't hear that many people talk about this one. I'm gonna continue that trend. In fourth place is Iron Man 3, with 8 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 8.3% of the voters. Iron Man 3 gets criticized for the villains, and having Tony go, "Guys, I'm totally not Iron Man anymore." And then in Age of Ultron have him just be Iron Man again and act like this movie didn't happen. Also, Bill Maher is in this movie. Remember when he shamed everyone for liking comic book movies?
Bragging that you're all about the Marvel Universe is like boasting that your mother still pins your mittens to your sleeve.
In fifth place is Iron Man 2, with 4 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 4.2% of the voters. Iron Man 2 is a film that I've never heard any major praises for. The main criticism this film gets is that too much is going on. Iron Man is dying, Mickey Rourke wants revenge on Tony, the government wants Tony's tech, Nick Fury is there, Justin Hammer's trying to beat Tony, and Iron Man pees himself. Sam Rockwell is pretty good. Black Panther, despite its popularity, gets a lot of criticism for bad world building and bad characterization. Despite being more technologically advanced than most, Wakanda still decides who their leader is based on a fight to the death, and farms rhinos. They also somehow kept their existence a secret for millions of years. Michael B. Jordan is pretty good. Tied with Iron Man 2, Black Panther, and Thor, which I didn't mention because I talked enough about it, is Ant-Man and the Wasp, also with 4 people saying it's their favorite, which is 4.2% of the voters. Unlike the first film, this movie did not involve Edgar Wright in any way whatsoever. Because of this, it's not as funny. The main thing I hear people say about this film is that it's forgettable.
Ant-Man and the Wasp was the exact same thing. I watched Ant-Man and the Wasp in the cinema, and that fact escapes me regularly. I'm like, did I? I don't even remember it anymore. Like, what was Ant-Man and the Wasp about? It was like quantum stuff? Like,
I mean, Ant-Man and the Wasp was shit. Like, it was a low point in the MCU for me. Because it's like Ant-Man becomes like a secondary character in his own film.
Yeah. The only reason I don't remember to say it's shit or not is I don't remember it really well at all. Like, I know that stuff happens in it. I remember the trailer more than I remember the film at this point. Yeah, it was such a Blair movie.
Now, firstly, I would just like to give Screen Rant props for remembering Ant-Man and the Wasp. That's quite impressive. Not many people do.
There's also a lot of exposition and quantum stuff. Walton Goggins is pretty good. Captain America Civil War is in 6th place, with 2 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 2.1% of the voters. I assume that this might have something to do with Zemo's plan, or BVS. Winter Soldier and Ant-Man are tied with Captain America Civil War. People might hate Winter Soldier due to anything from SK's video that recently came out, and people might hate Ant-Man because of quantum stuff. Doctor Strange is in 7th place along with the Winter Soldier and Ant-Man, with 1 person saying it was their least favorite, which is 1% of the voters. Doctor Strange is praised for the visuals, but it's also criticized for the rules and the main character. Also, while looking up criticisms for this film, I found this review by Letterboxd patron Katie.
When the words Doctor Strange will return appeared on screen, someone literally screamed, "Of course it will, f***!" And I have never related more to any human being ever.
1.5 out of 5 stars. Avengers Endgame is also in last place, also with 1 person saying it's their least favorite, which is 1% of the voters. This is probably because it introduced immortality, a way to bring back whatever character they want without consequence, and had Captain America's ending, which some didn't like. Spider-Man Far From Home is also in last place, again with 1 person saying it's their least favorite, which is 1% of the voters. Far From Home gets criticized for Mysterio's plan, the Edith glasses, and the mischaracterization of nearly everyone. I don't have time to save the world, I want to go on vacation! This movie also has one of the most hated scenes in MCU history. The 3 people who selected Other said, "Your mum, don't have one," and Malekith versus the Geode. Time for a quickfire round. This time I gave the voters the option to pick more than 1 film. 1 more person responded this time. I'm ordering it from highest to lowest. Captain America the Winter Soldier has 87 votes, which is 89.7% of the voters. Avengers Infinity War has 86 votes, which is 88.7% of the voters. Guardians of the Galaxy has 85 votes, which is 87.6% of the voters. Iron Man and Captain America Civil War both have 82 votes each, which is 84.5% of the voters. Thor Ragnarok has 77 votes, which is 79.4% of the voters. The Avengers has 73 votes, which is is 75.3% of the voters. Spider-Man Homecoming has 69 votes, which is 71.1% of the voters. Captain America the First Avenger and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 both have 64 votes, which is 66% of the voters. Avengers Endgame has 60 votes, which is 61.9% of the voters. Spider-Man Far From Home has 55 votes, which is 56.7% of the voters. Doctor Strange has 45 votes, which is 46.4% of the voters. Black Panther has 42 votes, which is 43.3% of the voters. Ant-Man has 36 votes, which is 37.1% of the voters. Iron Man 3 and Avengers Age of Ultron both have 23 votes, which is 23.7% of the voters. Ant-Man and the Wasp has 20 votes, which is 20.6% of the voters. Thor and Captain Marvel both have 12 votes, which is 12.4% of the voters. Iron Man 2 has 11 votes, which is 11.3% of the voters. The Incredible Hulk has 8 votes, which is 8.2% of the voters. And Thor the Dark World has 4 votes, which is 4.1% of the voters. The people who selected other said None, a funny thing that happened on the way to Thor's hammer, Venom, Jay's mom's I am interpreting high quality as top tier, so I really like some others, and is this a joke? This question used to be called which MCU films are of high quality. Also, there's a hipster who answered this poll by just bragging about how they hate the MCU. Same rules as last time, but with movies people believe are bad. Though this time only 86 people responded. Thor the Dark World has 68 votes, which is 79.1% of the voters. Captain Marvel has 55 votes, which is 64% of the voters. The Incredible Hulk has 53 votes, which is 61.6% of the voters. Iron Man 3 has 44 votes, which is 51.2% of the voters. Iron Man 2 has 37 votes, which is 43% of the voters. Thor has 30 votes, which is 34.9% of the voters. Black Panther has 29 votes, which is 33.7% of the voters. Avengers Age of Ultron has 24 votes, which is 27.9% of the voters. Ant-Man and the Wasp has 23 votes, which is 26.7% of the voters. Avengers Endgame has 17 votes, which is 19.8% of the voters. Ant-Man has 14 votes, which is 16.3% of the voters. Doctor Strange and Spider-Man Far From Home both have 8 votes, which is 9.3% of the voters. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Thor Ragnarok both have 5 votes, which is 5.8% of the voters. Captain America Civil War has 4 votes, which is 4.7% of the voters. The Avengers and Avengers Infinity War both have 3 votes, which is 3.5% of the voters. And finally, Iron Man, Captain America the First Avenger, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Spider-Man Homecoming each have 2 votes, which is 2.3% of the voters. The people who answered other said, Surprise Moon, shaving my head before and after. Objectively, none of them are bad, but some are better than others. They're all terrible. Avengers back in the habit. None of them are bad, and none. Some of these shows aren't considered canon, or weren't out yet when I sent the poll. But they were on the Wikipedia page, and those are usually right. Also, most of these shows I either haven't seen all of, or haven't seen any of, so there might be some incredibly brief descriptions. In first place is Daredevil, with 37 people saying it's their favorite, which is 43.5% of the voters. Daredevil was the MCU's first dive into darker material. I'd guess that people like the characters and the story. Daredevil also has more hand-to-hand combat for the action. In second place is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., with 12 people saying it's their favorite, which is 14.1% of the voters. Most people praise this show for the amount of twists and turns it takes within the story. Also the characters. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. started to gain more popularity because no one had anything better to do in 2020. Agent Carter is in third place, with 5 people saying it's their favorite, which is 5.9% of the voters. Agent Carter is praised for the characters, the writing, and the 1940s aesthetic. It also has one of the best characters in the MCU that doesn't have powers. Unfortunately, Agent Carter is one of those shows that got cancelled earlier than it was supposed to, resulting in an incomplete story. Who was the man in black who killed Thompson? We have never, and probably will never find out. This is also one of the few shows in the MCU, or actually the only show in the MCU, that has a character who originated from the show appear in one of the movies.
I am the star.
Jessica Jones is in 4th place, with 4 people saying it's their favorite, which is 4.7% of the voters. A reoccurring praise I see is that the title character is great and played by a great actress. Also, fun fact, this is one of the few MCU properties where
they have sex!
Tied with Jessica Jones is The Punisher, again with 4 people saying it's their favorite, which is 4.7% of the voters. The Punisher, unlike most MCU protagonists, is a brutal vigilante. He doesn't care who dies in order to serve justice. Sure, some MCU heroes have killed some people, but it's usually few and far between. While this type of character is typical, it is an interesting approach to an MCU hero, and I put hero in quotes. It's more anti-hero. People also say that Joe Berthenol is the best Punisher. The show was also cancelled too soon. You still have the Punisher movies. You have the Dolph Lundgren one, which is just a generic 80s action movie where every scene looks like it was filmed in the same building. You have the Thomas Jane one I know nothing about. It had a laundry short for some reason 8 years later. But you also have the insanity that is Punisher Warzone. Tied with The Punisher and Jessica Jones is None. Nothing to say here, so let's move on. In 5th place is WandaVision, with 3 people saying it's their favorite, which is 3.5% of the voters. WandaVision wasn't out yet when I sent this poll, so I don't need to say anything. In 6th place is Hawkeye, with 2 people saying it's their favorite, which is 2.4% of the voters. Hawkeye isn't even out while I'm making this video, so it doesn't matter. In 7th place is Luke Cage, with 1 person saying it's their favorite, which is 1.2% of the voters. This person probably likes Luke Cage because of the Mike Coulter, the political commentary, the well-paced action, and the other characters. I'm reading this off of IMDb reviews, so don't quote me on this. Tied with Luke Cage is Inhumans, with 1 person saying it's their favorite, which is 1.2% of the voters. I couldn't figure out why this mammal liked it, so let's move on. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is tied with Luke Cage and Inhumans, but it wasn't out yet when I posted this, so let's move on. What If is also tied with those 3 things I just mentioned, but it's not even out at this moment, so it doesn't matter. The people who said other said not applicable. Where is gay? Just where is it? I know I left it somewhere. J2K18. Bruh, half of these ain't canon and the other half ain't out yet. Geode vs. Rhino Milk, Battle of the JXE memes. Don't watch. I don't watch any MCU TV shows. Haven't watched any. Not applicable. None, and have not seen any, unfortunately.
I am the Iron Fist.
In 1st place is Iron Fist, with 21 people saying it's their favorite, which is 27.3% of the voters. Iron Fist is hated due to having an unlikable protagonist, a boring villain, boring action, and nothing making sense. It's viewed as a hobo's Daredevil. So much so that it was cancelled after only 23 episodes. Tied with Iron Fist is surprising no one, Inhumans, with 21 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 27.3% of the voters. Inhumans is hated for the acting, CGI, and writing. Inhumans is not only regarded by even the biggest MCU fans as the worst show they ever made, but the worst anything they ever made. So much so that it's probably never gonna be acknowledged again. In second place is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., with 10 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 13% of the voters. The one-star reviews of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. criticize Joss Whedon's writing style and the constant MCU references.
Thor, Captain America.
Captain America.
Chris Banner.
Stark.
Iron Man.
Barton. Romanoff.
The Avengers.
Hydra.
I've also seen this show be the punchline of a joke.
We're the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Don't worry, sir. You're safe. Oh, so you're not the Avengers?
Well, not exactly. I mean, we have Agent Coulson, and he was in the first Avengers, and he has like bionic
hand.
Yeah.
So we're totally f***ed.
Yeah.
Yep. I am the star.
We make quite a team.
In third place is Jessica Jones, with 2 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 2.6% of the voters. The negative reviews don't like the main character, which is understandable. From what I can tell, Jessica Jones is the type of character who you'd either love or hate. Similar status to Harley Quinn, Sonic the Hedgehog, anyone played by Shia LaBeouf, or Leo Getz. The Defenders is tied with Jessica Jones, also with 2 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 2.6% of the voters. The only consistent criticism I could find in the one-star reviews is that they don't like Sigourney Weaver's character. That's all I could find. Cloak and Dagger is also tied with the Defenders and Jessica Jones, with 2 people saying it's their least favorite, which is 2.6% of the voters. A consistent complaint I see in the IMDb reviews is the pacing, the bad characters, and the writing being driven by an agenda instead of making sense. This is also a common criticism in quite a few movies post-2015, including ones from Marvel. 2 people also said not applicable, so you can also put that in third place. Daredevil is in fourth place, with 1 person saying it's their favorite, which is 1.3% of the voters. The complaints I hear without having to look it up are Karen Page and the overly dark tone. Tied with Daredevil is Luke Cage, also with 1 person saying it's their least favorite, which is 1.3% of the voters. The bad reviews claim that Luke Cage is a badly written character. Sorry about how brief these are. Tied with Daredevil and Luke Cage is Runaways, also with 1 mammal saying it's their least favorite, which is 1.3% of the voters. This person might hate it because of the production value, the agenda, the child acting, or any other reason. I'm still reading this off of IMDb reviews. All 3 of these weren't out yet when I sent this. The answers for other said, bruh, half of these ain't canon and the other half ain't out yet. Have not seen any, unfortunately. None. Don't watch. Not applicable. It will definitely make everyone watching laugh. Jay's sex tape. Bring on the P. I don't know. And the only one I've seen is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which I quite like. Time for 2 more quickfire rounds. Same rules from last time apply. Daredevil has 44 votes, which is 67.7% of the voters. Jessica Jones has 25 votes, which is 38.5% of the voters. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has 21 votes, which is 32.3% of the voters. The Punisher has 17 votes, which is 26.2% of the voters. Luke Cage has 14 votes, which is 21.5% of the voters. Agent Carter has 12 votes, which is 18.5% of the voters. The Defenders, WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Hawkeye have 5 votes, which is 7.7% of the voters. Iron Fist and Cloak and Dagger have 4 votes, which is 6.2% of the voters. Loki, What If, and None have 3 votes, which is 4.6% of the voters. Runaways, Miss Marvel, Moon Knight, She-Hulk, and Not Applicable each have 2 votes, which is 3.1% of the voters. Inhumans has 1 vote, which is 1.5% of the voters, and Hellstrom has 0 votes. The unique answers for others say, I do not watch the MCU TV shows, haven't watched any, not applicable, something back in the habit, this person spelled habit with 2 B's, have not seen any unfortunately, don't watch, and of course, bruh, half of these ain't canon and the other half ain't out yet. Let's see what people would hate if they didn't have to hate one thing. Iron Fist has 26 votes, which is 45.6% of the voters. Inhumans has 24 votes, which is 42.1% of the voters. The Defenders has 16 votes, which is 28.1% of the voters. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has 11 votes, which is 19.3% of the voters. Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Runaways, and Cloak and Dagger all have 6 votes, which is 10.5% of the voters. Agent Carter and None have 5 votes, which is 8.8% of the voters. Hailstrom has 4 votes, which is 7% of the voters. Daredevil has 3 votes, which is 5.3% of the voters. The Punisher, Miss Marvel, Moon Knight, and Non-Applicable have 2 votes each, which is 3.5% of the voters. WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, What If, Hawkeye, and She-Hulk each have 1 vote, which is 1.8% of the voters, even though none of those shows were out yet when I posted this. And all of the unique answers for others said, I do not watch the MCU TV shows, none, not applicable, have not seen any unfortunately, 1 + 1 = 2, no opinion, none that I have watched, don't watch, didn't watch most of the show, and bruh, half of these ain't canon and the other half ain't out yet. And after seeing the amount of people who haven't seen the MCU TV shows, I decided to average the amount of answers along those lines to see how many don't watch the MCU shows. Excluding the people who didn't answer or put answers that could mean anything, 10.75 people don't watch the MCU TV. For a couple of these, we're going to only look at the top 3 choices. Because there's so many characters, this was not a multiple choice question, meaning I had to go through the 96 answers from each of these and count them by hand. So some of these might be a little off, but I'm pretty sure I got it. The top 3 choices for favorite character are Captain America, with 19 people saying he's their favorite, Spider-Man, with 11 people saying he's their favorite, and Iron Man, with 8 people saying he's their favorite. And if we look at the results for least favorite character,
number 1 is Captain Marvel. Not by a little bit, but by a significant amount.
And Darcy Lewis is in second place, with 6 people saying she's their least favorite, and 5 people put none, which is third place. Also, some decided to give a joke answer. Batman, Porg, Jay. This time, the character has to specifically be a hero. The top 3 choices for favorite hero are Captain America in first place, with 18 people saying he's their favorite, Spider-Man and Iron Man both in second place, with 17 people each saying that they're their favorite, and Star-Lord and Thor both in third place, with 7 people each saying that they're their favorite. The top 3 choices for least favorite hero are Captain Marvel in first place, again, with 43.5 people saying that she's their least favorite, which is almost the same amount of answers as last time. Nothing in second place, with 5 people saying that they don't have a least favorite character, and Hulk in third place, with 3 people saying that he's their least favorite character. By the way, if anyone's wondering why some of the answers say 0.5, that's because I grouped 2 questions together multiple times and didn't get more than 1 answer for some. And here are the joke answers. William DeMarco, Mahler, Mario. Isn't it ironic that the most beloved character and the most hated character are both captains? The top 3 choices for best MCU villain are Thanos in first place, with 42.5 people saying that he's their favorite, Loki in second place, with 12 people saying he's their favorite, and Vulture in third place, with 11 people saying he's their favorite. The top 3 choices for the worst MCU villain are Malekith in first place, with 33.5 people saying he's their least favorite, Aldrich Killian, Ultron, and Darren Cross in second place, with 6 people each saying that they're their least favorite, and Eric Killmonger in third place, with 5 people saying he's their least favorite. The joke answers were Jay, Sonic, Geode. The top 3 choices for the best MCU moment are Infinity War's ending in first place, with 16.5 people saying it's their favorite scene, the portal scene in Endgame in second place, with 10 people saying it's their favorite scene, and the Captain America and Winter Soldier vs. Iron Man fight in Civil War in third place, with 7.5 people saying it's their favorite scene. The top 3 choices for the worst MCU moment are Nothing, with 12 people saying they don't have one, I Don't Know, with 9 people saying they don't know, and the Mandarin reveal, with 8 people saying that it's their least favorite scene. The joke answers were Screen fades and the black and white pixels scroll past, Rhino milk, poo, penis. I also put this question in a text format because so many MCU films get announced without warning, I'd probably miss a lot if I made it multiple choice. The top 3 most anticipated MCU films are Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness in first place, with 27 people saying that they're excited for that the most, Spider-Man No Way Home in second place, with 20 people saying that they're excited for that the most, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in third place, with 10 people saying that they're excited for that the most. I also received some joke answers. The Snyder Cut, The Suicide Squad, Luno Dog, none. Not really a joke answer, but it is other, so. God Bless, Doctor Strange in the Realm of Tisms, I Don't Know, and Rhino Milk. Time for the question with an answer that might make you feel things. Everyone answered with their own unique set of words, but to make this easier to comprehend, I read all of these and grouped them into bad, slightly negative, neutral, slightly positive, good, and unclear. So bad was the most common feeling, and neutral was the least common feeling. This might be because Avengers Endgame already came out, and a lot of people are saying that that's not going to be topped. Other people say that the MCU hasn't had a good movie since 2017. This question may have an obvious answer to some, but I think it's debatable, so I asked it. More people believe that the MCU will end on one Earth rotation, specifically 53, which is 55.2% of the voters. But 24, which is 25% of the voters, believe that the MCU will never end. It will keep going even after the sun explodes or the Earth gets sucked into a black hole. The people who answered other stated rods. I hope so. It will end if they royal mess up. Eventually, yeah, but as long as they still have interesting characters and concepts to adapt and people still go see them, I don't see them stopping anytime soon. There's a massive well of lore surrounding the comics that the movies have only scratched the surface of. Probably, yes, but I think it will take like 10 to 15 years for it to end. Part of the journey is the end. I mean eventually, but not for another decade at minimum. Only when it stops making money. If it does, it'll be rebooted and go on for decades. You forgot to put the apostrophe. In 100 years. If it does, it will be rebooted. Hopefully soon. I bloody hope so. It will, but if you think it won't, you're right and I agree with you. Eventually, yes, but it will take a long time. And I won't live to find out. After going through all of that, we have learned that Avengers Infinity War was the most favorited MCU film, Thor the Dark World was the most least favorited MCU film, Captain America the Winter Soldier was the most beloved MCU film, Thor the Dark World was the most hated MCU film, Daredevil was the most favorited MCU show, Iron Fist and Inhumans were the two most least favorited MCU shows. Iron Fist was the most hated MCU show. Daredevil was the most beloved MCU show. Captain America was the most favorited character in the MCU. Captain Marvel was the most least favorited character in the MCU. Captain America was the most favorited hero in the MCU. Captain Marvel was the most least favorited hero in the MCU. Thanos was the most favorited villain in the MCU. Malekith was the most least favorited villain in the MCU. The ending of Avengers Infinity War was the most favorited scene. Most of the voters didn't have a least favorite moment from the MCU. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was the most anticipated MCU film. Most of the voters feel that the MCU is in a bad state, and most of the voters believe that there is an end in sight. So the conclusion to leave this video with is that most MCU fans have this state of mind.
Just let me die! Just let me die! Let me die in peace! I'm perfect! I'm too perfect! This is what happens when you try to play God!